Sony, Chairperson of the Facility Asset Management Community of Interest, or COI, as SAME is now calling what used to be known as committees. And I welcome all of you folks who have taken the time to dial in today. Today we're honored to have Ms. Martha Gray, the Director of DLA Energy, to give us an update on the utilities privatization activity that's been going on for several decades. Martha's going to give us an overview of how we got to where we are, summarize the utilities that have been privatized in this time period, hit some of the issues and successes that have been had, and give a sense of where the future is going. So thank you, Tamel, for moving the screens along. So just to remind everybody, mute your phone. There is a chat box at the bottom of the GoToMeeting function. So if you want to submit questions during the course of the briefing, please feel free to do that. You can click on the little down arrow that's pointing to the word chat. It'll open up a window, and you can type in your question, and then I will present those questions to Martha as we're going through. We're going to be recording this, and it'll be posted on the SAME website. So Martha, are you there? Martha, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Good. Okay, great.
Ready to hand it over to you, and thank you, Martha, again for walking us through your slides.
Okay, just one small correction. I'm the Director for DLA Energy Utility Services, not DLA Energy as a whole. My boss he can have that particular job. That's a big job. Starting with the agenda, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at UP overall, talk about some of the benefits of UP and some of the challenges, and then talk about what DLA Energy's role is, and more specifically, and have just a really brief discussion on source selection, and then, of course, we'll take your questions whenever they come. So I am on slide 5.
Yes, we see it.
Yep, that's it. So this is the definition of utilities privatization, generally known as UP. It's how the military installations can get safe, reliable, technologically current, resilient, and environmentally sound systems at a relatively lower cost than under continued government ownership. It's a pretty tall order. We want all of these things that are underlined, and we want them for cheaper than we can do it ourselves. And in this process, the installations shift from being owner-operators and become smart utility service customers. So the ownership of those pipes, those wires, those lift stations, all the other components of the system belong to a new system owner and no longer to the government. And then the government buys back the service for those systems, much like you do at your own homes when you pay the electric company every month for your service. Next slide, some of the authority and the directive for UP. The authority comes from 10 U.S.C. 2688. This is a DOD authority, not a federal authority, so you won't find UP in the federal sector, such as at NIH or DHS or any of those places. They don't have the authority to do that. It's strictly for DOD. The directive from OSD is that UP is one of several alternative financing mechanisms that a military department may use to get those utility improvements, and it should support DOD's energy reliability, energy resilience, and cybersecurity goals. UP is a divestiture of the property and does include a bill of sale. The sale of that infrastructure is in perpetuity. At the end of the contract, it does not revert, the infrastructure does not revert back to the government. Looking at the scope of the program, all proposed UP actions require a business case analysis, the business case, and a certified economic analysis. The business case analysis is the why. why are we doing this? Why is UP the best choice for our particular installation in order to improve their utility systems, and to make sure that the installations and the service have considered all possible options? The economic analysis is the cost of it, and it compares to a government should cost estimate, which you might see in other documents also referred to as an agency tender. And that is what the government should be paying if it were doing everything it ought to be doing. The conveyance is a separate and distinct action from the procurement and falls under 2688, OMB, DOD, and military service policies. The service secretary coordinates and authorizes the transfer via real estate documents, and we receive an authorization memorandum from that service saying, yes, award the contract. Next slide. Two major components of UP are reliability and resilience, and these are huge in our program. The reliability comes from the system deficiency corrections. In a solicitation, we will give you a list of the things that we believe need to be corrected within the first 5 years to help ensure your compliance with applicable laws, regulations, or implementations of any new technologies. The idea is to begin to build that strong backbone of utilities for the particular installation. You won't get resilience without reliability. The resilience is where the government and the new system owner worked collaboratively and cooperatively to determine how best to add resilience to that system. The suggestions for that can come from either party and could include such things as microgrids, backup generation, redundant sources of supply, and even efficiency measures. If we use less demand, it decreases our vulnerability. Some of the benefits of UP. Our system owners are experts with innovative solutions. They know how to protect the public health and the environment. They have a long-term view and are motivated through a 50-year contract, up to a 50-year contract, to provide the best service and value to the installations and DoD. They have expert knowledge and solutions to complex existing and emergency industry issues, and just to name a few of those, they're experts in PFOAs, PFAS issues, brown water issues, reconfiguring electric systems to get the best possible reliability and resilience from those systems, and natural gas systems to make sure that those systems are safe. If you weren't aware, that's kind of how UP began way back in the 90s with an explosion of a natural gas system that actually killed a couple of people, and the NTSB found that the military was at fault for not maintaining that system. So that's kind of the genesis of UP. So all of these things are really critical to make sure that those systems are safe and providing the best possible service that they can. We've made significant steps forward in the last year and a half or so on policies and guidelines, and especially in talking about making sure that our system owners are performing the extensions needed for the utility. One of our big challenges that we'll talk about in a moment are asset transfers that are needed after a third party has constructed, and some of these policies have gone a long way toward mitigating the risk from those transfers and eliminating some of those transfers to where the new effort is being performed by the system owner. And so as defined in the FAR, if a system owner builds it as part of the UP contract, they automatically own it. UP contracts are very flexible. There's a lot of give and take in this to get the job done. Sometimes we have to be creative and think a little outside the box, and our UP contract allows for those possibilities. Next, resource conservation. What we found is that water and natural gas usage has declined consistently across most installations after they've been privatized, generally anywhere in a range from 25 to 32%. Some installations, even back in the early 2010s, if you will, met their 2025 energy goals for water savings and whatnot because of the benefits of stopping leaks and, sorry, lost my place, which lowered their resource needs. So, and regular leak detention programs. Knowing the condition of the pipe that's out there can provide a reduction in the cost of water, help us manage our resources more efficiently, and in turn improves the installation's resilience and supports those policy goals. Safety, industry leaders bring their safety culture to these privatized installations, and we see improvement in that, and we see our installations adopting those best practices that our industry partners have now brought them. We get some technology benefits. GIS precision mapping gives us a much better look. Some installations already at least have some, but this generally improves it. And the installation can share in that mapping for their own uses, and also things such as SCADA, which, believe it or not everyone has, but in UP it's generally something we bring forward, which is a time saver and a cost saver overall. Well, you can't talk about benefits unless you're willing to talk about challenges. One of the bigger challenges in UP right now is the implementation of cybersecurity and those compliance requirements. The DFAR clause that you see listed on the screen has been added to all solicitations and contracts. The OSD supplemental guidance that was published in February of 2019 also discusses compliance requirements for privatized systems, and the services are still developing the supplemental implementation policy. And the challenge of this is it's changing really quickly. We spent a long time just trying to figure out whether or not UP would be considered covered, the systems that the system owner uses, his IT systems and whatnot, to benefit the system, if that is something that we needed any awareness of. Is it considered covered defense information? And it turns out that yes, it is. So that really brings the information from this clause and the requirements of this clause into play. So we're still working on how to make that work, and it is one of our largest challenges right now. Good contracting officers representatives. We have some great ones out there. They are our boots on the ground, because since the contracting officer is located, not always co-located on the installation. If it's a DLA Energy managed contract, we're all here in Lorton, Virginia. We have installations spread out across all states and into Alaska and Hawaii. So a good COR is worth their weight in gold. But some of the challenges are retention of those CORs, making sure that they have the right capabilities and training, and how much time does it take? Everyone seems to, initially we all thought that it wouldn't take much time, and we're finding out it takes more time than we need. So making sure that those folks can give it the dedication that it requires is a challenge. And then funding for REAs, requests for equitable adjustments or claims. Sometimes that can be a challenge and can take it can take several months to process for funding. So timeliness on submission of those types of items are key. Other challenges are asset transfers. I mentioned those earlier. Asset transfers are when someone else builds the infrastructure. So think about it for a moment. If you privatize a utility system, we now have a system owner running that system. The military no longer has personnel to run that system. If other people are building things that are required to be connected to that system, then those assets become stranded or orphaned, depending on terminology you want to use. And trying to figure out how to get that infrastructure over to the system owner has been a bit of a challenge. We're making great progress, but it still remains a challenge. Very often, the inventory records on the installation were insufficient. The military doesn't count well. They don't know what they have, they don't know how much it costs, or it's incorrect. So it takes time, and everything that takes time takes money to sort that out. If we need to issue an additional bill of sale, that requires the involvement of the military service. And then The system owner cannot perform any operations and maintenance or renewals and replacements through the UP contract for those assets until they are conveyed to him. So if you're building, I don't know, if you're building a new barracks complex and it needs a substation and a lift station, you won't have anyone to manage those until it's conveyed to the system owner. Whereas if the system owner builds it, it goes to him immediately, him or her, it, I guess. End of the year activities. This is the federal government. We're very busy in the fourth quarter. There are always a significant number of contracting actions, both for new awards and in our existing contracts, looking for new service connections and capital improvement projects that they can use with money that they are not going to use in other places. So sometimes the challenge is being able to turn these very quickly in a short amount of time in order to make maximum use of the dollars that we have. And pricing adjustments. If there is a tariff rate, those can often be very complicated and complex. If it's a price redetermination, those often have a level of complexity as well, and we are converting the redeterminations that we have into EPAs, and EPA is kind of the wave of the future on this, an economic price adjustment model that adjusts the price on an annual basis, and those we've found to be much more straightforward from an administrative perspective. So I think we're going to talk about that a little more in just a moment. The number one question I get for UP is, why does it take so long? Well, I probably should tell you how long it takes. Generally, it takes anywhere from 28 to 36 months for a procurement, sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little less. So why is that? That's a long time. The conveyance is forever. It's in perpetuity. There's no reversionary clause in this to give this stuff back at the end of the contract term. So we have to make sure that it's right. There is a lot of due diligence in this. The inventory is rarely in what's considered new condition, and our industry partners are very often not prepared for that. The resulting contracts are for, I should say, up to 50 years. Most of them are 50 years. And it is a competitive solicitation per legislation. If the local offer does not offer competitively in that competition, then, and the competitive solicitation is not successful, then we do go out and attempt to speak to the local utility and see if they have any interest in an other than competitive scenario, which can take another 12 to 18 months in and of itself. So this is not a sprint, it's definitely a marathon.
Martha, this is Mark. A quick question. Can you explain the difference between when you're using the term perpetuity, but also you have these 50-year duration contracts? How do those two different time windows relate to each other?
Okay, great question. So keep in mind this is kind of a two-part transaction. There is the conveyance of the infrastructure. That's in perpetuity. Once we sell it, we've sold it. But the acquisition of utility services, which is the contract portion, is limited to 50 years. So what that does is, at the end of 50 years, we would come back to the person that owns the infrastructure and negotiate a follow-on contract for the next term. Right now, we're limited to 10 years going forward in the future. Possibly sometime we may see a legislative change that allows for a 50-year follow-on. So it does take us into a sole source arrangement at the end, but we do not automatically get that structure back. It stays with the system owner.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So the government's committed to using UP. DOD likes the program. Congress seems to like the program. We look for industry input at various forums. There are OSD industry days. The DLA Energy has a worldwide energy conference every 2 years. We just had it earlier this year in 19. The next one will be at 21, and it's at the Gaylord at the National Harbor here in the DC area. Energy Exchange we can often have tracks in those forums, and gives the industry a chance to give us their input. We do have an OSD working group that allows for us to collaborate on policies and practices. Each of the services provides an annual report to OSD on how they're doing on UP. The post-conveyance reviews are where the OSD has a directive to go out and do some, and then each service has a directive to do more of them, where they go out once the system has been conveyed and it's been under privatization for at least a year or two. They'll go out and speak to the installation and see if, take an in-depth look at its UP contracts and how it's performing. GAO has reviewed the program several times. They're finishing a review now. We have DoD UP post-award workshops that our system owners attend at least a portion of, and these serve as a training event for our CORs. And then we've been developing broad system performance metrics, in part as a result of the OSD guidance, the February 2019 guidance, and partly because we have to have a way to measure performance of these utility systems, both pre-privatization and post-privatization. And so some of those are using SAIDI, SAFE, CAIDI measures, tracking the number of service calls over time, and a really critical one, especially for an electric system, is how many unplanned outages have there been and how has that changed over time. These lessons that we gather, lessons learned, we apply them to future requirements, to future procurements, to strategies. We have regular discussions between DLA Energy as the contracting arm and the different program management offices to be proactive. We have roundtable reviews of new requirements. When an installation sends us their UP requirements, we sit down as a group and go over them, both with the installation and at the level, to make sure that we are doing the right things for the installation and it's understandable what they want to do. We use a variety of standard operating procedures and templates and have regular internal training to improve our efficiency and the quality of what you're seeing. So that kind of describes
Martha,
Sure.
I have a question I'd like to pose to you and get your reaction. And the question comes from Rise, and he says, the reason we do this is because it's getting harder to borrow more money. And he puts that as a question mark. Has the U.S. Army pursued this? And I think you'll see that in a second, Rise. Or similar initiative, for example, housing in our post or pre-World War II history. If so, how has it worked out, and why was it not continued? So it's a very broad question, Martha. I don't know if it's something that you want to tackle or not. Are there other kinds of privatization beyond utility? I think is another way of summarizing it.
Well, there is housing privatization, but that works differently. And I am not a housing privatization expert. That's more of a lease type arrangement, from my understanding, and that property does return to the service at a certain point. So it's not the same as a utilities privatization. The Army actually has privatized more systems than anyone else. I would say they're in the forefront of this. The Air Force is probably second, and the Navy behind them. And I think you'll see that as we go through this a little bit. But so they've been very active in the UP world since the mid-90s and forward. I don't think anyone had done any privatization like pre-World War II. Not to my knowledge.
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. I suppose there may be some installations where the local utility put in the infrastructure and just kept it from the beginning. I don't know. A better question for the services maybe, but.
Dennis asked a question about how many systems are going through this process, and I think you're going to talk to that. And Bob asks, is each service responsible for completing their business case analysis and certified economic analysis? If so, do you know which firms do this for the Army, Navy, and Air Force?
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
If there are business case analyses that are required, that are performed, do you know which companies do this for the Army, Navy, and Air Force? In other words, how do you know to proceed with a UP before there is UP in place?
Oh, well, each service has their own consultants that potentially help them, or they're doing it on their own. There are any number of them, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to keep interrupting you again, Martha. I hope you don't mind.
Okay, that's okay.
Does the Navy look at wastewater treatment plant ownership differently from the Air Force relative to RCRA, Exclusion Act? That's a pretty technical question. I don't know if you have the answer to that.
So far, the Navy is viewing as best I can tell you right now, they're looking at it as the Army does, that it is possible to convey the wastewater treatment plant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Martha. After you.
That's okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about about DLA Energy Utility Services. How did we get this gig, you might ask? DRID 21 in January of '98 said that we would assist the military services with the privatization of utility-related infrastructure. And we are the contracting agent of choice for the Army, the Air Force, and now the Navy. Navy business is very new for us. We're just about to release our first solicitation. We are the execution arm, DLA Energy is, for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, for energy initiatives. And you can see our mission statement, which is to provide pre- and post-award contracting and technical expertise. We offer that specialized contracting and technical expertise. We do competitive and other than competitive actions. We have cradle-to-grave support, everything for the contracting, everything from development of the solicitations through negotiations and a best value source selection award decision. And we have the full range of post-award contract administration for the 50-year term. So unlike some contracting offices that award a contract and then hand it off to an administrative agency for administration, we don't do that, we keep them. Our cradle-to-grave engineering support includes development of the RFP technical tenets. We participate on source selection evaluation boards, help with the preparation of life cycle cost analyses and assist in negotiations. And on the post-award side, any technical and pricing support that's needed for price adjustments, new connections, capital work, and more. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. You can. Okay. Can you hear me, Mark? Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep talking then. Thanks. So, moving to the next slide. Just a little graphic of how we help the military services with their privatization efforts. Next slide is an overview. So far to date, we've awarded 95 contracts at 64 installations for about $19.8 billion. We administer 72 of those for $23.6 billion. So back in the early days of this program, we did not keep what we awarded. We awarded it and then gave it to the installation to manage. And I don't know, back in like 2004 or 5, we stopped doing that. So since that time, we've kept pretty much everything that we've awarded. You can see our historical contract value and how that's grown over time. So on the horizon, there are 796 total systems that would be possible for privatization. You can see that in FY20, we have 8 contracts coming for 14 systems at 7 installations. You'll see those in a follow-on slide, and another 6 systems in progress. So there's another, what is that, $4.5 billion out there. And then I'm sure there'll be more to follow that. You ask what the distribution is. I'm going to tell you in just a second. So the benefits of dealing energy to the UP program, as I stated before, DRID 21 told us to do it. For utility services, this is our core capability in pre-award and post-award. This is all we do. We have no other type of contracting here. We work exclusively on UP solicitations and contracts, and any templates, SOPs, manuals, or processes that are out there were all developed by us. How do we support post-award? So it's funny, Mark considers this to be the past. I consider this to be the future. Because this is the long part of UP is dealing with it once you've awarded it. Everything from economic price adjustments to price redeterminations to capital improvements to asset transfers to quality assurance surveillance plans and to CPARS, which is the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System. All of those inputs, that's kind of soup to nuts what we do. This should answer your question on distribution. We're just beginning with the Navy. We only have one solicitation queued up. We'll talk about that in a second. We don't have any post-award with them, so they right now manage their own. This is what we have. We've awarded 52 Army contracts, 43 Air Force. You can see that the bulk of our dollars are on the Army side of the program. We administer 39 Army contracts and 33 Air Force contracts. And you can see those dollars at the bottom there. These are the installations and the systems for post-award. Somewhere on these, I think, sorry, there should be a legend, but electric, natural gas, sewer, water. And this is the Army. The next slide is the Air Force. We do have one. Kind of misspoke. We have Fort Story, used to be an Army system, now is a Navy system, but is sort of owned by the Air Force. A little complicated, but has to do a lot with joint basing. Pre-award efforts, showing you our 19 awards. These are the things that, with the asterisk, are the things that were awarded this year. So in 20, we're looking at awarding Tinker Sewer Water for the Air Force, Joint Base Lewis McChord, Sewer Water, Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall in Arlington, all of that sewer water, Oahu Water, Fort Buchanan, electric, sewer, and water at Yuma Proving Ground, and West Point's thermal. Those are what is on tap for FY20 awards. So these have already been in the pipeline for some time. And then FY21 is sewer water at Aberdeen Proving Ground. You can see that the Air Force has a schedule. We're going to be doing some FY23 awards for them at Cape Canaveral, Patrick, and Beale, and Kirtland. Navy, right now, Mayport in Florida is there. That's our first one. It's scheduled to be released here in the next few weeks. You may have seen the synopsis go out last week. That is the first one. We've agreed to do a pilot program with the Navy to do UP at 3 installations. This is the first one. They have not yet confirmed the other 2 installations or systems. How we support pre-award, everything from issuing the source of sought notice in the beginning to issuing the request for proposals, receiving those proposals, conducting evaluations, leading negotiations, and eventually awarding the contract. Source selection. Initial selection is competitive. If unsuccessful, may try an other than competitive action, as I said. The source selection team has a source selection authority, an advisory council, which are folks from the program management office and leadership at the installation, and also an evaluation board, which includes the installation functional experts. They are the voting members, utility services members, and support contractors who support the evaluations, but they are not voting members. We do a best value trade-off determination. It is not lowest price technically acceptable. It is a best value, so the lowest price may not receive the award, or the highest rated may not receive the award. These are the evaluation factors and subfactors, technical capability, past performance, risk, socioeconomic, and price. Technical capability and risk are evaluated at the subfactor level. And you can see the order of importance there. Technical capability, past performance, and risk are approximately equal. Socioeconomic is significantly less important. When combined, those four are significantly more important than price, and we are adding cybersecurity in the mix on that. And that is everything that I prepared. We have some points of contact on the back of that if you're interested in learning more about our program. Any other questions?
You may have said this, I apologize. Will these slides be made available?
I'm going to assume that yes, they will, but that's a Mark question.
We are posting this recording onto our YouTube page. So if you visit YouTube, type in Society of American Military Engineers, and you should go to the webinars playlist, and it should be up there. And I will also post the YouTube link to the Facilities Asset Management webpage on our website, same.org.
Great, thank you.
You are welcome. I am looking at the chat right now. I don't know if you have answered these questions, but there was a question of how many RFPs do you anticipate will be issued before the end of the 2019 calendar year?
Oh, you're a whole. That's a whole.
The Mayport one will be issued, and we're tracking the Cape Canaveral Patrick. That'll be close. It may be January, but we're hoping by year end.
Okay, and another question, is GSA participating either as a contracting agency or receiver of service?
No, neither.
Yeah, that's okay. That answers my question.
Another question is, have there been successful utility privatizations of failed government-owned equipment? Main transformer replacement, it's a question. And also, to further complicate things, how does UP work if an installation has an outdated electrical grid?
Yes, a lot of the time, some of the reason for UP is because the equipment is failing. So I think I mentioned that we, in the previous slides, that we have initial system deficiency corrections. We tell potential system owners what we believe to be failing, and so that they can propose on how to correct it. So very often they have to come in and then they have 5 years to do those things to get the system up and running the way that it should be and to fix those deficiencies. To further complicate things, if they have an outdated electrical grid, very often one of the deficiency corrections might be to update that electrical grid. Or that's what generally we would expect that would be proposed.
We have another question. Are there opportunities for AE firms to support you in the requirements analyst phase, perhaps to assess conditions and identify initial systems deficiency corrections?
Yeah, so the AE services are contracted by each service. So I would say that all those contracts come to an expiration at some point, and I would think that they would have to go out competitively. So I would think that the answer would be yes, but I don't have information on what those timelines are.
Here's another one. How is DLA performing monitoring the contracts reporting consumption outages, etc., through DLA or directly to the services? And how is this being monitored, graded, rewarded, etc.?
So we're just getting into we're just starting with really being able to collect metrics, and it's not something that anyone had any great priority on previously. The services have not necessarily been great about collecting metrics for their non-privatized systems. They'll do some of them. Outages is generally something they will track. So I think I mentioned that some of the broad system performance metrics that are now being inserted into our new contracts. And so, but they're collected by the service. So the energy manager at each installation will want that data. The Air Force, AFCEC is collecting it. The Army generally has the energy manager collect it and then reports it up with the rest of whatever their reporting is.
Another question is, understand business case prior to award. How do we know that UP is superior to ownership in the post-award phase?
How do we know that UP? To whose ownership? UP is superior to continued government ownership?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't suppose, good question. I don't suppose you would ever really know the answer to that, but generally I think they do find that ownership by UP is better. Running utility systems is not a military core function. So it frees them up to do the things that they need to do. You know, they're warfighters, they're soldiers, they're airmen. It's not a core function for them. So not having to do it allows them to concentrate on what their core capabilities are.
Another question is, are UP required to have meters on all systems? If not, is the performance estimated?
So the installation is required to have a metering program, and so the installation has metering. Some of the older UPs will own some meters and have to report that data, but the upcoming ones, the newer ones, there will not be meters included unless it's any system meters that the system owner needs to have. But any secondary metering or building meters, facility meters, they won't have any of that.
Martha, can you hear me? I have a question for you. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, this is actually out of box thinking. I'm thinking about as being resilience and readiness chair for Orange County Post SME. I always think about how can we protect ourselves with security and everything. Now, in the contracting section, there are participants. How are you screening everybody? Are they screened to make sure things do not leak out for security purposes? It's always a concern. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, so the information, there is some level of security screening before you're allowed to access the solicitation documents. You have to go through a process. It's not public. It used to be public. We used to just plop it on out there. We don't do that anymore. It is behind a secure site, and your company has to gain access to that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question. I am collecting data for consumption, outages, etc., and am noticing that installations serviced by UP are not great at reporting. Outage data not reported at large installations for years in a row. How may I influence this through DLA?
Well, I don't think you're going to have to. OSD is now requiring that they provide that data, so they will be providing it, and with the metrics that we're putting in place, it'll be provided. But you will have to collect that from from the service.
Can you share the metrics?
Can you share the metrics? Maybe. Let's see.
While she is pulling that up, just wanted to inform everyone about the Small Business Conference, November 20th through the 22nd in Dallas, Texas. You are still able to register and book a reservation through the SAME SBC website, which is samesbc.org.
Okay, so the kind of the starting metrics, if you will, are the number of emergency service requests received each month, the number of unplanned outages, regardless of their duration, on a monthly basis, the number of non-weather related unplanned outages, regardless of duration, the percent of available man hours spent on emergency service requests, the SAIDI, SAIFI, and CAIDI indices, electric consumption, gas consumption, water quality, the percent of analyzed samples that are in compliance with requirements, water consumption, wastewater quality, the percent of analyzed samples that are in compliance with environmental requirements, wastewater production. Those are the basic metrics that we're starting with. I would not be surprised at all if they didn't add others over time. And each service may decide they want to see something slightly different.
Could you explain DUERS, DUERS?
No, we have no we have no connection with that. I've never even heard of that.
Does anyone have any final questions? You could put it via the chat functionality.
I have a question for Mark. Are we going to get a PDH email to all the participants, or we should request one?
Yes, you must request for the PDH certificate.
Okay. Thank you.
If we do not have any other questions, thank you for joining in, and thank you, Martha, for presenting this information. I'm sure it's been very useful for everyone who has attended. And again, you can find this presentation on our YouTube page at Society of American Military Engineers, and I will also post a copy of the link on the SAME website or the Facilities Asset Management COI page. But thank you again, Martha. We're really glad to have you.
All right. Okay, thank you so much for asking me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Everyone enjoy the rest of their day.